So, but let's look at kind of the multifamily industry in terms of, kind of on the development side, looking at the supply side a little bit, because it looks like, according to RealPage, the residential permitting pauses, on the single family home side, but multifamily starts. Sorry, just the permitting has paused, but the starts are really increasing.
Just again, top line numbers here. Single family permits are down 3.6% since last year, but multifamily permits are up by 16.3. Permits are just one stage of a process that takes a year and a half to 2 years really to complete, maybe more on the multifamily side. But starts are stage 2. That means they've broken ground on construction, and single family starts are up 3.7%, and multifamily starts are up 42.3% since last year. Now, the third stage, which is completions, you see a different moment, really. Multifamily completions are down 33.3% since last year, and single-family completions are up a tiny bit, 0.7%. Both multifamily and single-family completions were down for the month, with single-family down 4.9%, multifamily down 6.6%. We're permitting, we're starting. We're not building. We're not finishing yet.
Yeah. It's taking longer to get these things actually built.
And there are a lot of confounding variables, I think, here to fully explain completions. Like the majority of these houses and apartments were started a year or more ago, and the obstacles to construction continue to make building slower and more expensive. There's a lot of regional variability. There's a lot of things that you can't like say, okay, the completions of this month were the starts of a year ago or the permits of a year and a half ago. It's not, I couldn't do that. I looked at the tables for it. I just couldn't, I couldn't do that. I think that there's like a lot of factors that are market specific too. That could mean that some places have a better labor market, have a better, in terms of even logistics and commodity prices than others. So it's hard to say completions and explain them, but they do tell a story in and of themselves. A third less multifamily units were built last year, and just 1% more single family homes were built compared to the year before.
That's interesting, because I think that kind of goes against some of the narrative of, I think a lot of people admit that we don't have enough housing, but I think that also a lot of people are saying, oh, we're building way too much right now. Just seeing anecdotally, oh, I see, construction going on. I see some cranes in the sky, but we're still falling way behind.
Yeah. And this is one of the themes really for many of the articles and reports from this week, is that construction of housing continues to be problematic. It seems almost like it's getting worse, but there's still barriers.
Well, and the concern is, that the builders are slowing down because of rising mortgage rates. Commodity prices are still high, and they're worried. How much do I want to be building? Going into a potential recession. If there's going to be one or not. When we still need the supply of housing, we still have a big hole we're trying to fill.
And that's why I wrote here, there are still not enough houses and not enough apartments to satisfy demand. The houses and apartments are being built, but they're not finished yet. And so, yes, there's promise in the pipeline, but it's still like there's, even if we finish all the houses that we're building, we'd still need more. And the construction that's ongoing is still ongoing. So we've got a little bit to dig out of.
It'll be interesting to see once that big bulk that is under construction, once it finally, if ever, gets delivered, just what the absorption looks like and what type of market environment it will be when those deliveries are put on the market.
Yeah, and that's another guiding question that I had for these reports is what about slow home sales and high home prices? Is that going to drive multifamily growth, or are we at an intermediate point in a changing housing market where housing prices as in general may go down? I don't think, at least the story that I've heard, and this is maybe a bias towards multifamily, but are people holding off on buying and they're renting instead, because multifamily demand has not gone down in the same way that home sales have gone down. And as we'll see in the other reports, home prices haven't really gotten a huge hit either. So
no, I mean, the prices are still growing. And I think it's a good point. But I think for not everyone, most individuals, can't afford to buy a home. It was hard to buy with 2%, 3% interest rates. Now you're paying 5.5% to 6%. That's just completely unobtainable. Your mortgage, the price, your mortgage payment's gone up 30 to 40% year over year. So most people can't afford that, and so that's forcing a lot more people to be renters longer. And there's these people who have sold their house and they can't find somewhere else to buy because they sold their house at X, and now it's, now the price to buy something new is X, times 30, 130%.
And that's what, I think that people, they don't want to sell because then they got to go buy again. You don't want to buy if you've got this bad, you're going to get a bad or a worse mortgage. But
and that's even if you could find something.
Yeah,
it's not like there's that much inventory, and so you have to be very competitive, put a lot of time and effort in. Pay up, pay whatever, still over asking. I mean, again, this is anecdotally, but I'm still hearing reports people paying 25, 50 over asking, just to get a deal, and they're having to do gap appraisal, coverage of where they're going to have to bring more cash to the closing table if the home doesn't actually appraise. Just to be able to win the deal. And so the demand is obviously still out there. At what point you would think that there will be a point where that decreases, but it's also every single day there's just a couple more basis points of the population that is a renter by necessity rather than by choice. I'm
seeing a little bit of cracks, I think. In housing prices and how many, but still nothing. Those cracks are not big enough to be seen from the bird's eye view that these metrics will measure. Housing prices in general, there's a lot of momentum behind that, and it hasn't really dented it. Yeah.
Well, and again, going back to Fed tightening, and selling off those mortgage-backed securities, what is that going to do to the financing market? Is it, if there's less liquidity to finance residential housing, rates we're going to see rates move up even further, which would make sense. But then, is it going to, there's just less liquidity, maybe even harder to qualify as a borrower, if they really tighten things up.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So, and again, I think that's going to be a driving people into rent. Now, on the extreme case, you're going to get people who, because rents are obviously continuing to go up and certain rentals are pricing people out. And so you either have the option of going down in class, finding something cheaper, maybe in a less desirable part of town, slightly older property, or you move in with roommates, or you move in with your parents. And that's where we're going to see some negative consequences of maybe people saying, hey, I want to buy, but I don't want to rent. I'm going to move in with my mom and dad.
Yeah. That's why a part of me does think that we are maybe in this weird intermediate point. It's not like anything could happen. And there are multiple trajectories and ways to kind of prepare against this. But it'll be interesting in the next few months. Really, we'll start to see and gather more data about where things are going to.
I think people are starting to bump up against the ceiling, especially with gas prices and the cost of everything else. There's only just so much, and people are prioritizing, food and selter. I mean, we saw that in the pandemic. I mean, that's what people want to make sure they pay before anything.
And if we're still talking about selling homes, and there might be people that are holding off that are holding off for only some time, and there's going to be a time when people need to sell a house and they can't wait any longer, and that will be interesting to see. If they need to sell that house, are they going to take that price down by 50,000 or 100,000?
And what do you think is going to be what's going to be the point of what's going to make someone need to sell a house?
Well, if they get a new job somewhere else, basically, or for all those other reasons where they kind of have to move somewhere else. But local moves, that will be another one interesting to track, is how many home sales are based on a city to city move versus
because a lot of people, if they've bought a house recently, they don't want to move, they don't want to sell because they've locked in this incredibly low interest rate.
Exactly.
And they're looking around, they're looking at their pretty low monthly payment on the house that they bought that has now appreciated in value. And they've got a low payment compared to what they could go get. And why would you're locked in at a great payment? Why would you put yourself in a situation where you're just paying more interest? Unless you really just bought the wrong thing.
That's I think is like the biggest motivation for me, but that's that's kind of beside the point.
So we're not still building not building enough single family homes, still not building enough apartments. People are going to be staying put in their single family homes. It seems like quite a bit a recipe for more renters for quite a bit of time.